everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to talk about a super common childhood illness that honestly leaves a lot of parents scratching their heads. It's called Roseola, and its signature 1-2 punch of symptoms can be really confusing the first time you see it. So let's just get right to it. This is the big mystery, right? You've just survived a few tough days with your kiddo having a really high fever. You're breathing this huge sigh of relief because their temperature is finally back to normal. And then, boom, this strange rash just appears out of nowhere. It's baffling, for sure, but that's the classic calling card of roseola. All right, so let's back up and start at the beginning, the fever. With roseola, we're not talking about a temperature that slowly creeps up. Nope. This thing usually kicks off with a very sudden and often very high fever. We're talking sometimes over 103 degrees Fahrenheit or 39.4 Celsius. And, that can be pretty alarming for any parent to see. Along with that big spike in temperature, you're probably going to see a few other things going on. You might notice a runny nose, your child might be extra irritable or fussy, maybe a little more drowsy than usual. You could even feel some swollen glands in their neck. The thing is, at this stage, it looks a lot like any other bug, which is what makes what happens next so unique. So, what in the world is this thing? Let's break down what's actually going on here. The official name is roseola, or if you want to get fancy, exanthem subunum. All that means is it's a common, contagious, viral infection that almost always hits babies and young kids, and it's famous for that very distinct pattern. First a fever, then a rash. And when I say common, I mean really, really common. Get this, up to 95% of children have already been infected with the virus that causes roseola by the time they turn 2. So if your child gets it, trust me, you are not alone. It's almost a rite of passage for toddlers. And the good news is, once they get it, they're pretty much immune for life. Okay, now the virus that causes roseola is called human herpes virus type 6, or HHV6. I know that word herpes can sound really scary, but this is a hugely important point. It is absolutely not the same thing as the herpes simplex virus that causes cold sores or genital herpes. They're just two different viruses in the same big family. HHV6 does not cause any of those other conditions, period. So how do kids get it? Well, like a lot of childhood viruses, it spreads through little respiratory droplets from coughs, sneezes, you know the drill. After a child is exposed, it takes about 9 or 10 days for symptoms to even show up. And the tricky part, a child can actually be contagious during that time before you even know they're sick. Okay, now let's get to the star of the show, the most distinctive feature of roseola, the rash. The real clue here isn't so much what the rash looks like, it's all about when it shows up. This timeline lays it out perfectly. You've got anywhere from 3 to 5 days of that high fever. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the fever breaks. It just vanishes. And it's only after the fever is completely gone that the rash appears. This fever first, rash second pattern is the absolute key to knowing it's roseola. So what's this rash actually look like? Well, it's usually made up of small pinkish red spots. It tends to start on the chest and back, and then maybe spreads to the arms. Here's a cool trick. If you gently press on one of the spots, it'll turn white for a second. That's called blanching. And maybe the best part of all, it's not itchy, and it usually disappears on its own within a day or two. Okay, so your kid has it. What's the game plan? How do you take care of them? The best news is that treatment is all about simple, supportive care you can do right at home. It really just boils down to these 3 things. First, fluids. Keep them hydrated. Second, you can give them a fever reducer like paracetamol or ibuprofen to help them feel more comfortable. Just make sure you check with your doctor for the right dose. And third, just let them rest. Their little body is fighting off a virus, and rest is exactly what it needs. And this is so important. Because roseola is caused by a virus, antibiotics will do absolutely nothing. Sometimes what happens is a doctor might prescribe an antibiotic for the fever before the rash shows up. Then when the rash appears, everyone thinks it's an allergic reaction to the medicine. So just remember, it's a virus, it doesn't need antibiotics, it just needs to run its course. Now, while roseola is almost always a mild illness, there are a few important warning signs you should know about. Let's quickly go over when it's time to pick up the phone and call a doctor. The main complication we worry about with roseola is that the super sudden high fever can sometimes trigger what's called a febrile convulsion, which is a seizure caused by fever. In fact, roseola is the culprit behind up to a third of these seizures in kids under 2. Now, I know that sounds terrifying to witness, but they're usually very brief and don't cause any long-term harm. Still, you need to know when to get help. So here's the checklist. Call your doctor or emergency services right away if your child is extremely sleepy and hard to wake up, if they're refusing to drink anything and you see signs of dehydration, or if they have a convulsion that goes on for more than 5 minutes. But let's end on the most common and most reassuring outcome. For the vast, vast majority of kids, this whole thing resolves on its own pretty quickly. Like the source material says, spontaneous, natural recovery within 1 week is usual. The fever goes away, the rash fades, and just like that, your kid is back to their happy, energetic self. So Roseola solves one fever then rash mystery, but it kind of opens up a bigger question, doesn't it? Knowing this classic pattern helps you spot roseola, but what about other illnesses that show up with a fever and a rash? Understanding the differences is such a powerful tool to have in your parent toolkit. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.